Hi, I'm Callan Waters with Cattlemen's Conversations, brought to you by Southern Cattle Company, the University of Florida, and South Dakota State University. Today, I'm here with Nick Simmons. He's the County Extension Director in Escambia County for the University of Florida, and he's going to share with us some information about genetics and how they play a role in our herd and just discuss some different topics. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
Thanks, Callan. Glad to be here with you, and appreciate the opportunity.
Nick, can you talk a little bit about the various components that go into the phenotypes of our cattle and a little bit about what phenotypes are?
Sure. So obviously, as producers, we spend a lot of time, looking at our cattle, making decisions on what we see. We make a lot of decisions on what we can measure. And so essentially, we call that, the phenotype, basically what we can see or measure. So I think for producers, it's important to think that there's actually some underlying components that go into that. Some we make through selection, some we make through management decisions. And so I like to think of it as P, or phenotype, equals genetics plus your environment. So if you think about genetics, obviously that's the genetic makeup of our animals. A lot of the change that we make with that, we do in our breeding decisions year in, year out. Bull selection, heifer replacement, cow retention. And so basically that's what's on the inside of that animal that either gives it the ability to increase production or change something about your herd, or maybe limits its ability to do something within your herd. So you have that genetic component that you have to think about. And so the other, which is really handled more in our management practices, is the environment. And so the environment can play a huge role in the ultimate potential of our cattle. Our calves that are growing, let's just say milk potential of our cows, our feeding program or vaccination program, forage systems, all that can kind of commingle together to kind of give our environmental influence. So it's one of those things that you may have some superior genetics within your herd, and a lot of us are, working to improve that year in, year out. But, if you've got some really poor environmental conditions, not a good, supplemental feeding plan, or not a good forage plan, really the genetic potential is not ever going to really be met. And so that's one of those things. You've got what's working on the inside and what you can control on the outside. And ultimately that gives us what we can see or what we can measure in our cattle.
Okay, great. So we know with genetic progress, one of the best ways we can move our herd forward is through selection. So talk a little bit about threshold traits and how selection can or should be influencing those traits.
Sure. So if we think about threshold traits, there's obviously a lot of traits that we're looking at year in, year out, with growth potential, yearling weights, weaning weights, and things like that. But if you think about threshold traits, essentially they're traits that have either or, a yes and a no type of observation. So one of the things that we can think about as a pretty easy threshold trait is fertility. So there's obviously a lot of influences and things that can affect fertility. But one of the easiest way that we as producers and extension agents and scientists look at that is, for a cow, whether she got pregnant or she didn't. Okay, it was either conception or not. But if you think about all the underlying factors that can go into that, I believe that there's some environmental issues that can affect that. Basically, what you look at as a threshold is that point where the genetic ability simply either allows the trait to go through or not. Another one that I like to think about that is important to a lot of people is calving ease. And so there's kind of a point where you either had to assist in a birth, or you didn't have to assist, assisted or non-assisted. basically one or the other. And so some of the underlying factors there may be pelvic area, birth weight. And so if you think about taking a step back, birth weight may be related to structure. If you start really hounded on trying to increase structure, you can start having some birth weight issues, one thing or the other. So it's one of those things that we encourage people not to do single trait selection. Kind of make sure that you're fitting the mold and making sure you're adapting your herd from multiple angles. But it's important for producers to remember that that there may come a point where some of the selections may turn off, for a better term, the ability for something to happen. So it's just one of those things to kind of keep in the back of the producer's mind.
Okay, great. So like I said, as we move our herd forward, some of those selections that we make, we're going to see some pretty rapid progress. And some of them we know are going to be more long-term. And I think a lot of that ties back to heritability. And so talk a little bit about heritability and maybe some of it, how it relates to those common traits that producers are selecting for.
Yeah, so heritability is basically the chance that a trait can be expressed or be repeated. Most of the heritability that we look at is measured on a 0 to 1 scale. For most of us, and for the research side, we look at anything that's above a 0.4 and above, we would call highly heritable. And so most of the things that we see that are highly heritable are really related to a lot of terminal type traits. Some of the carcass traits we see are highly heritable. Frames, stature, things like that we usually see as highly heritable. Some of the reproductive stuff is really kind of on the lower end of heritability. Although we can certainly see some repeatability in cows that maybe reach maturity a little bit earlier. That's one of those things that we just haven't seen that you see from generation to generation. So in thinking about that, if you're looking at raising stalker calves and you're really trying to get some growth going there, you can make some choices, using your EPDs and working with some of your phenotypic evaluation. But thinking about that, growth, yearling weights, weaning weights, and things like that, you can move the needle pretty quick, from one generation to the next. So that's one of those things that you can certainly add to your toolbox and thinking about going forward. Heritability, again, is one of those things you kind of have to think about it, read about it, and learn kind of how it plays into your selection process.
Okay, great. So when you say something has a heritability of 0.4, can you explain to people what exactly that would mean, kind of numerically?
So essentially, it's almost like a correlation to the fact that the genetic ability, let's just say, of a bull, he has a heritability of yearling weight of 0.48. For the means of the selection side, basically that's a highly positive correlation that his progeny later down the line, you will see a repeated increase in yearling weight. You'll have to make the selection, if you're looking at EPDs, comparing one bull to the next, but you pretty well know that, if there's some pretty good growth EPDs in there, that you're more than likely going to see that carry over for the next generation. We have some moderately heritable things. Marbling would be one of those that kind of falls into moderate. A lot of that kind of plays into breed selection. Obviously, there's a lot that can go into what different breeds can bring to the table. But essentially, it's a correlation of the genetic potential and what you'll actually see on the back end a little bit higher.
Okay, great. So it's basically the probability that those traits will be passed on to their progeny.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, very good. I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss genetics with us a little bit today. Again, this was Nick Simmons. He's the County Extension Director in Escambia County. He's got a strong background in genetics and livestock, so we really appreciate him being a part of Cattlemen's Conversations today. Again, this program is brought to you by Southern Cattle Company. They're a great seed stock operation here in the Florida Panhandle, and we really appreciate their support along with the support of all of our sponsors. Thank you, Nick.